Lieutenant Ryan Dalton arrived at the sand-swept landing pad of Series 7 just as the pale sun crept over the horizon. He stood tall in his worn flight suit, his pulse quick with equal parts pride and dread. The outpost was little more than a cluster of metal shelters and antenna towers, but it sat at the edge of known space far beyond any safe zone. Ryan carried a small datapad in one hand and a standard-issue pulse rifle slung over his shoulder. He had trained for moments like this, when a lone officer faced the unknown, yet nothing in training could prepare him for rumors of a monster that lurked beyond the dunes. The briefing room had been quiet, almost too quiet. Command officers traded uneasy glances as they spoke in low tones. Supplies had stopped arriving. 3 weeks ago, patrol teams vanished. Entire convoys simply stopped sending transmissions. Each report painted a more terrifying picture, until talk of a monster grew into a grim certainty. Ryan listened without interrupting. He had joined the cause to make a name for himself. He would not let fear rule him. When the senior officer looked him in the eye and said, "Find out what happened," he felt the weight of every life lost and every hope of rescue resting on his shoulders. He spent the morning checking his gear. He tested his rifle's power cells and adjusted the scope. He filled his canteen with filtered water and packed rations in a canvas pouch. On his belt he clipped a small energy beacon and a handheld scanner meant to pick up unusual readings. Before he left, he paused at the outpost's edge and studied the endless dunes. The wind carved shifting ridges of red sand that stretched farther than any eye could see. The air tasted of dust and rust. He breathed deeply, steadying his nerves. He knew that once he stepped beyond the com relay, no help would come until he returned by midday. Ryan had reached the last known coordinates of the missing convoy. He found the wreck of a transport ship half buried in sand. Its metal hull was pitted, its landing legs bent at odd angles. Charred scorch marks blemished the exterior. Inside the cockpit, warning lights blinked in silent protest. Ryan crouched by the hatch and pressed his scanner to the hull. Readings spiked in odd pulses that he could not explain. He tapped the datapad and attempted to open the door. With a hiss of released pressure, it swung inward. The cabin was empty except for scattered gear and overturned seats. No bodies lay in sight. He followed the wreckage back onto the dunes, tracing a path of broken equipment and scattered footprints. The tracks were deep and wide, as if made by something larger than any human. He paused and knelt to run his fingers along the sand. The edges of each print were crisp, though the wind had already begun to blur them. Alongside the prints, he noticed strange carvings in stone fragments, simple shapes that formed a pattern he did not recognize. They looked deliberate, like a trail of markers left by something that did not want to be found. As he pressed deeper into the wasteland, the sun dipped low and the air chilled. Long shadows stretched across the dunes, twisting into shapes that played tricks on his vision. Ryan felt a faint hum in his mind, a whisper at the back of his thoughts. He shook his head and forced himself to focus on the path ahead. He reminded himself that this was just his nerves. There was no reason for a soldier to doubt his own senses. Still, he could not deny the thrill that pulsed through him. He was on the brink of a discovery that could change everything. When twilight fell, he spotted a figure standing on a distant ridge. At first he thought it was one of his own scouts returning from patrol. Then he saw her, a lithe shape outlined against the fading sky. She stood motionless, watching him with a stillness that froze his blood. Her figure was humanoid, but something about her posture was both alien and fluid. Ryan raised his rifle, heart pounding, as he moved closer. Each step brought him face to face with the unknown, and with every breath he felt the pull of a mystery that demanded answers. He stopped a dozen meters away and called out his rank and purpose. The figure tilted her head, and for a moment Ryan thought she might vanish like a mirage. Her skin glowed faintly in the twilight, pale and smooth, as if lit from within. Her eyes reflected the last light of the sun. He did not yet know if she was friend or foe, monster or savior, but he felt, deep in his bones, that his life and, perhaps the fate of humanity's frontier, would never be the same after tonight. Ryan crouched behind a low ridge as the pale colors of dusk faded into a soft blue sky. He held his handheld scanner close and watched its lights dance over the rippled sand. The device beeped faster when he hovered it above a shady patch near his boots. Sweat stung his eyes even though the air had cooled. He brushed wind-worn sand aside and uncovered jagged stone shards half buried in the dune. Each shard bore a simple carving, a spiral, an arrow, a circle. These shapes formed a trail leading deeper into the desert. He tightened his grip on his rifle and rose to follow. He moved along the ridge under the deepening twilight. The path wound around dune tops and dipped into shallow valleys. Sometimes he had to climb over rocks or squeeze through narrow gaps. His uniform was stiff with dust and his helmet clasped bit into his jaw. He paused to take a sip of water and tapped his helmet comlink, but only silence answered. Command signals could not reach him this far from base. He felt a slight tremor under his boots, as if the ground itself stirred. The carved stones ended at a flat plateau of cracked earth. Here the scanner glowed red with high energy. He scanned the plateau in a slow circle, eyes straining in the fading light. The only movement was the long shadows that stretched over the dunes. Then, at the edge of his vision, he saw a figure. She stood motionless, her outline clear against the darkening sky. At first he thought it was one of the outpost scouts returning late, but her posture was wrong. She was too still, too calm. She held herself like a dancer poised for action. Her skin looked pale blue beneath the rising moon. Ryan's heart pounded, and he raised his rifle, breath catching in his chest. She tilted her head and took one slow step forward. Ryan kept his aim steady, but his hands shook. He tried to speak, but his voice came out as a whisper. "Who are you?" His words echoed in the silent air. She did not answer aloud. She only watched him with eyes like molten silver. In that gaze he felt a faint energy stirring in his mind. A soft whisper crawled through his thoughts. He shook his head to clear it, but the feeling remained. His pulse raced, and he realized that she was not human. Without warning, she lifted her long hand, palm open. A low hum filled the air, like distant wind chimes. Ryan felt a sudden calm wash over him. The rifle in his hands felt heavy. He lowered it, confused. He saw her lips move, but no sound reached his ears. Then a clear thought formed inside his head. "You came alone." Ryan jumped, spinning to find the source, but she stayed perfectly still. The memory of her voice vanished as quickly as it came. He pressed a hand against his helmet, trying to block the echo it left behind. A terrible roar split the night. From a hollow in the dunes, a sand predator hurtled toward Ryan, its 4 legs churning sand and its sharp teeth bared. The beast was nearly 10 feet long, with sinewy muscles and glowing yellow eyes. Ryan fired a warning shot, but the bullet kicked up sand at its feet and did nothing to stop it. His heart thundered. Then the woman moved. She sprang from the shadows like a flash of blue, her body twisting in midair. She landed between Ryan and the predator, her hand sweeping its front leg. The predator veered and crashed into the sand. She wasted no time. With a single strike she broke through the creature's side, and it slid to a restless halt. The beast let out a final echoing cry, then lay still. For a moment, Ryan stared at its ruined form. The thick fur was matted. Its breathing stopped. He lowered his rifle and took a cautious step forward. She walked past the fallen creature and knelt by its head. She placed her hand gently on its fur, and the body relaxed as if soothed. Ryan felt awe and respect rise in his chest. Slowly, Ryan knelt beside her. He reached out and touched the predator's ear, careful not to startle it. She looked at him and gave a single nod. He whispered, "It's dead." She pressed her hand to the ground and closed her eyes. A soft hum echoed again, but this time, it felt like gratitude. Ryan studied her expression. There was no anger, no threat, only calm understanding. He realized she had saved his life, not harmed him. The greatest danger he faced was already gone. The moon climbed high, and the dunes glowed silver. She rose and took a step away from the body. Ryan stood and brushed sand from his uniform. He called out, "Thank you," steadying his voice. She paused, turning her head slowly so he could see her face. Her silver eyes met his, and he felt an unspoken promise. Then she turned toward a distant ridge and walked away, leaving footprints behind. Ryan watched her fade into the night. He felt fear, awe, and a fierce desire to follow. He tightened his grip on his rifle and moved after her, ready to learn her true nature. Ryan moved silently through the dunes, following the faint footprints that Valara had left behind. The moon was high, but the sand seemed to glow under its light. Each step he took stirred tiny whirlwinds of dust. He gripped his rifle but did not raise it. He felt that she meant no harm. His heart pounded as he crested a ridge and saw her, silhouette against the sky. She knelt beside a broken stone pillar half buried in sand. The pillar bore the same spirals and arrows he had seen earlier. Valara pressed her fingers against the engraved shapes and closed her eyes. Ryan watched as she drew deep breaths, her chest rising and falling with calm precision. He raised his scanner and swept it over the pillar. Energy readings surged, then faded. He lowered the device and stepped closer. "I'm Lieutenant Ryan Dalton," he said softly, keeping his voice level. "I want to help." She did not turn. After a moment she whispered a single word. Ryan felt it in his mind rather than heard. It, Guardian. The thought came clear and strong. He blinked and stared at her. She remained focused on the pillar, her pale blue skin reflecting moonlight. He took off his helmet and held it out. Inside was the small translator he had been tinkering with since he left the outpost. He cleared his throat and said, "I brought this. Maybe it will let me understand you." She looked at the device, then at him. Her silver eyes studied the rough metal box. After a heartbeat, she reached out and touched it gently. The translator emitted a soft hum. A thin blue light glowed along its edges. Ryan felt the hum vibrate through his fingers. Valara closed her hand around the device and pressed it to her chest. The glow intensified. Then she spoke one word aloud, and Ryan heard it in his own voice. Valara, relief washed over him. He smiled and said, "I'm glad to know your name." She nodded once, and the purple glow faded. Valara stood and turned to face him. Under the pale moon, her eyes held no fear, only curiosity. Ryan lifted a hand in greeting. She raised her own hand and mimicked his gesture. They held that moment to beings from different worlds sharing a simple exchange. As dawn crept on the horizon, the sky turned soft orange. Ryan checked his datapad and recorded the translator reading. He spoke slowly. "Why did you save me?" Valara's lips curved in a small, sad smile. She placed a hand over her heart and then pointed to the pillar. Ryan moved beside her and traced the spiral with his finger. He realized the pillar marked a boundary she protected. The sun rose fully, painting the dunes gold. Ryan lowered his rifle and placed the translator on the sand between them. He said, "I promise I won't hurt you." Valara stepped forward and picked up the device. She held it out to him and pressed it into his palm. Ryan felt its warmth. He nodded, understanding that this gift meant trust. Valara turned to leave and paused. Ryan followed without question. Together they walked toward a distant ridge where ancient ruins waited. Each silent step drew them closer to a new alliance, one that could change the fate of both their peoples. That Ryan and Valara moved through the dunes in silence. The translator's soft hum, the only sound between them. Dawn's light painted the sand in pale gold as they climbed a gentle ridge. Ryan glanced at Valara's pale blue skin glowing in the morning light. He tried to speak through the translator, but it only chirped with low power. She reached back and pressed it into his hand, offering a quick smile before pointing ahead. Beyond the ridge lay the ruins. The ruins rose from the sand like broken teeth. Crumbling walls of ancient stone bore faded carvings of spirals and stars. Ryan felt awe at their scale. He ran his fingers across a weathered symbol, then held the scanner close. It beeped and traced faint energy pulses beneath the surface. Valara knelt and placed her hand on the same spot. The ground thrummed under her touch. Ryan emptied a water pouch and offered it to Valara, but she shook her head gently and pressed her palm against the symbol again. The carvings glowed faintly where her fingers rested. Tiny sparks of light flickered, then faded. Ryan watched her face in the soft light. He saw pride mixed with something like sorrow. Through the translator he spoke, "This place is yours." "To God, yes." She nodded, eyes fixed on the stone. They explored deeper. The hallways led to a wide courtyard where a low dome rose at the center. Vines had crept through cracks, lending green life to the ruins. Ryan inhaled the scent of damp earth and felt a rare calm. Valara reached out to brush the vines aside, revealing more spirals carved into the dome's base. Her translator hummed loudly as it decoded a single word, "Sanctuary." Ryan whispered it aloud, tasting its meaning. Inside the dome chamber, the air felt cooler. Ryan's scanner lit up with strong readings. At the center stood a circular pool of clear water, still as glass. Strange runes formed a ring around it. Valara stepped forward and knelt, dipping her fingers into the water. As ripples spread, the runes glowed softly. The water lifted in a swirl, hovering a few inches above the surface, then settled back with a gentle sigh. Ryan watched spellbound. He moved closer, raising his rifle by habit, but did not aim. He felt no threat here. Valara looked up, and he saw her eyes shine with reflected light. Through the translator he asked, "Does this water bring life?" She closed her eyes and let the touch of the water wash over her hand. The translator chirped, "It heals. It restores." Ryan nodded, understanding that this place was more than old stones. It held power to renew. He crouched beside her, and placed his own hand on the water's edge. A warm pulse shyly touched his palm. He blinked as the sensation faded. Valara looked at him and offered a gentle tilt of her head. Ryan realized she trusted him enough to share this gift. He swallowed hard and said, "I will protect this place." "And you?" She responded with a soft nod and pressed a hand to her heart. He felt his chest tightened as they left the dome. Ryan paused at the entrance. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows. He looked at Valara and wondered how he would explain any of this to his superiors. She turned and pointed to the dunes behind them. Together they retraced their steps, the translator tucked safely in his hand. Back at the edge of the ruins, Valara paused and glanced at Ryan. For a moment, he met her gaze. He could feel echoes of her thoughts brushing his mind, gentle curiosity, cautious hope. He wondered if she felt the same strange pull he did. Then she turned and walked toward a distant rock outcrop. Ryan followed, heart pounding. They reached a cluster of boulders overlooking a narrow canyon. Valara stepped to the edge and looked down. Ryan joined her and peered into the shadowed depths. Below, he saw a thin ribbon of water cutting through the rock. He pointed and said through the translator, "A river." Valara nodded and whispered in her mind a single word, "Lifeline." Ryan realized the canyon carried water from the sanctuary to places beyond the dunes. He tapped his datapad and began recording. This discovery could change life across the frontier worlds. Valara watched him work, pride shining in her eyes. Ryan felt a surge of admiration for her. She was not a monster, she was a guardian of life. He packed his datapad away and said, "We should share this with Command." Valara's eyes widened. She shook her head firmly, placing a hand on his arm to stop him. Ryan felt a pang of confusion. He met her gaze and asked, "Why not?" "Through the translator," he heard. "Not yet." She pointed to the sanctuary ruins, then to the river, and back to Ryan. He understood. They had to protect this secret until the time was right. Ryan nodded and said, "I will wait." Valara smiled softly and pressed the translator into his palm. They camped nearby that night under a sky full of stars. Ryan could not sleep. He stared at the translator glowing faintly in his hand, then looked across at Valara resting by a small fire. Her breathing was calm, her face serene. He felt a fierce desire to stay by her side, to share every secret of the dunes. He allowed the thought to linger, realizing that his duty had changed. He no longer belonged solely to Command. His loyalty was now split between his orders and the Guardian, who had become his addiction. Ryan opened his eyes at dawn and saw the sky turn pale pink. He felt a soft ache in his chest as he rubbed sand from his uniform. Beside him, Valara lay sleeping under a torn piece of his jacket. He pressed a finger to the translator in his hand. Its blue glow was faint. He thought of the healing water, and the calm power of the sanctuary dome. He gathered his gear and rose, determined to face whatever came next. He walked toward the outpost's tower, his boots crunching on loose sand. The small console blinked with unread messages. He tapped his badge and spoke into the mic. After a pause, a clipped voice answered. "Lieutenant Dalton, report status." He spoke of his meeting with an unknown being, of ancient ruins, and of the healing spring. Silence followed. Then orders crackled back. "Classify and detain for study. Report coordinates at once." Ryan's heart sank as he read the words. Duty and loyalty warred inside him. He thought of Valara's gentle touch as she calmed the sand predator. He could not bear to see her caged. He tapped a reply, "Understood." Then he left the tower and slipped into the dunes. He carried the translator to the ruins and buried it beneath the broken columns. He vowed to protect her secret at any cost. When he returned to the shelter, his comrades watched his tired eyes. Corporal Garcia placed a hand on his shoulder and asked if he was well. Ryan only shook his head and went to the small observatory dome. Inside, he booted up his datapad and replayed the videos of Valara touching the spring. He studied the pulsing runes and the way the water lifted like gentle mist. He skipped meals and let the day pass in a blur of notes and sketches. He spent hours in the dome, drawing maps of the ruins and marking the river's path through the canyon. He scribbled crude codes to improve the translator's range. Every line he drew reminded him of Valara's pale blue skin glowing in the moonlight. The rest of the world felt dull compared to her calm presence. He ran on little sleep, fueled by black coffee and a fierce purpose. As night fell again, he could not stay inside. He left the outpost without his rifle, guided only by moonlight and memory. He crept past the bunkers and onto the dunes. The ruins lay ahead like dark stones against the sky. He whispered Valara's name and climbed toward the dome. The air was cool, and silent shadows shifted among the pillars. Back at the shelter, his absence sparked concern. Private Lee knocked on the observatory door at dawn. Ryan answered with red eyes and a hollow look. Lee urged him to rest. Ryan snapped that he was fine. Lee and Garcia exchanged worried glances as Ryan turned back to his datapad. Whispers spread that he had lost himself in the desert. The next morning, command sent a drone and 2 officers in armored suits. The drone's feed showed the dome's curved roof and the carvings around it. The officers stepped toward the ruins, weapons drawn. Ryan grabbed his rifle and raced to the site. He stepped between them and the carvings. He raised his voice and ordered them to leave. They called him mutinous and radioed for backup. Ryan stood firm. He lowered his weapon only when he knew no one else would follow. He slipped past the drone scanner and into the dunes, heart pounding. He dared not glance back at the outpost lights. He carried only a water pouch and the buried translator's echo in his mind. He ran toward the canyon where water still flowed. By nightfall, he reached the river's edge. The canyon walls glowed silver under the moon. He knelt and pressed his palm to the rushing water. He whispered, "I will protect you." The translator buried in his pack hummed faintly in reply. Ryan felt both fear and hope rise inside him. He was no longer just a soldier. He was Valara's defender, bound by a promise he could not break. Ryan pressed his palm to the cool river water and let the gentle flow wash over his fingers. Exhaustion pulled at his limbs, but his mind raced with worry. He had fled command, and left everything behind. As the moonlight danced on the ripples, he heard a soft footfall. He spun and found Valara standing at the water's edge. Her pale blue skin glowed faintly in the night. She held the buried translator in one hand, offering it back to him. Ryan's heart thudded as relief and guilt mingled in his chest. He took the device and set it on a flat rock. Through the tinny speaker he spoke, "I'm sorry I ran. They wanted to lock you away." He watched her silver eyes soften. She knelt and dipped her fingertips into the river. The water lifted in a gentle swirl, then fell like a whisper. Ryan felt the rush of warm energy fill his arm where he was scratched by rocky ledges. He flexed his fingers in wonder and said, "Your gift, it feels like hope." Valara rose and placed a hand on his shoulder. A pulse of meaning flickered through the translator. Protection. Ryan nodded, and brushed a lock of sandy hair from his face. He met her gaze and knew she understood. His promise? Together they turned as a distant hum broke the night's calm. Ryan looked up to see a command drone slicing through the sky, its light scanning the canyon walls. His breath caught in his throat. "They found us," he whispered. Valara's lips curved in a determined line. She placed a finger to her temple, and Ryan felt a soft echo of her thought. "Run." He grabbed her hand and pulled her behind a large boulder. They crouched low as the drone's beams swept past. Ryan held his breath while Valara's calm presence steadied him. When the light moved on, he exhaled and pressed closer to her side. Later, boots crunched on dry sand. 2 command officers crested the ridge, weapons drawn. Ryan peered around the rock and saw their rigid suits and blinking visors. His pulse pounded. He raised a fist to silence Valara's whisper, "Stay." He clutched his own rifle, but did not raise it. Instead, he let his eyes flare with quiet rage. He would not let them take her. Valara tensed beside him, ready to protect daughters. The officers swept the canyon floor. One officer pointed at the ruined translator sitting on the rock. Ryan rose slowly and shouted, "That's our only link. Don't touch it." The officers paused, surprised. Valara slipped from his side and moved toward the drone's landing pad above. She raised a hand, and Ryan felt a low vibration in his bones. A surge of power crackled through the air. Above them, the drone shuddered. Sparks danced along its hull with a sharp crack. It crashed into the canyon wall and tumbled down, sending dust and debris into the air. The officers yelled and opened fire at the falling wreck. Ryan stepped between them and the smoking ruins, shouting, "Stop." Valara emerged from the shadows, her silver eyes blazing with fierce light. She raised both hands, and the canyon trembled. The ground beneath the officers cracked, cutting off their advance. They stumbled and dropped their weapons. Ryan ran forward and grabbed the translator from the dust. Valara placed a hand on the canyon wall and guided the rock to close around the fallen officers without harm. Stunned, they lay pinned but unharmed. Ryan knelt beside them and said through the translator, "We only want peace." With the drone destroyed and the officers subdued, Ryan turned to Valara. Dawn's first light peeked over the canyon rim. He offered her his hand, and she placed hers in his. Together they sprinted through the rocky passage, following the river's voice. The canyon walls narrowed, then opened into a hidden valley bathed in morning gold. Lush ferns and crystal pools spread out before them. Valara led Ryan to a grove, where ancient trees arched over a spring. She knelt and touched the water, which shimmered with life. Ryan watched in awe. He knelt beside her and pressed a hand to his heart. Through the translator he vowed, "I will protect this haven, and you." Always. Valara smiled, a promise shining in her eyes. As they stood side by side, the valley's quiet power wrapped around them like a shield. Together they faced the rising sun and the uncertain future, bound by a bond stronger than any command. Dawn broke over the hidden valley, casting soft light on the crystal pools and ancient trees. Ryan and Valara stood at the grove's edge, hands joined. The air was cool and full of promise. After a night of rest, Ryan felt a quiet strength deep in his chest. Valara's eyes shone with gentle pride. Together they watched as birds with silvery feathers dipped to drink from the spring. Ryan knew this place had the power to heal not just bodies but hearts and minds. He set up the small unit he had carried in his pack. He placed it on a flat stone and pressed the activation switch. The device beeped, then streamed a live feed of the valley's wonders back to the outpost. Ryan spoke slowly into the mic, his voice steady. "This is Lieutenant Ryan Dalton. You are viewing the sanctuary of Series 7. I invite Command to witness its power for themselves. Valara is a friend and guardian. She saved my life, and she can save many more. Send a small envoy, come with respect, not force." Back at the outpost, command officers watched the feed in stunned silence. After hours of debate, they dispatched a small team of 3 officers in light suits. They carried sensors and scanners, but no heavy weapons. Their ship touched down quietly on a nearby plateau. Ryan and Valara met them at the valley entrance, the translator glowing softly in his hand. The officers' eyes widened as they saw the lush greenery and the glowing runes around the spring. One officer knelt by a wounded rabbit that had been caught in a fallen branch. Valara stepped forward and placed her hand on the creature's side. The rabbit's fur smoothed and the cut closed like morning dew evaporating. The officer gasped and looked at Ryan with new hope. Ryan smiled and said through the translator, "This is her gift. It can heal wounds, clear toxins, even revive dying plants." The officers exchanged looks of wonder, unable to hide their awe. They spent the day exploring the valley's hidden paths. They saw flowers bloom where none had grown for decades and saw the river's water lift in soft currents at Valara's touch. Ryan guided them to the old ruins and showed them the carvings. Valara added her own gentle hum, and the stones glowed in welcome. The officers recorded every moment, their skepticism replaced by respect. By midday, they knelt beside the spring and drank a small sip of water. Each felt warmth spread through their limbs. One officer said, "This can save lives across the frontier." As light turned to sunset, the envoy gathered around a simple fire. Ryan spoke up, "We ask command to protect this place and Valara's people. We ask for an alliance, not a war. Together, we can heal the frontier worlds and build trust." The lead officer looked at Valara and then at Ryan. She nodded slowly and said, "We will bring word to High Command. We will protect the sanctuary and honor your request." Valara stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Ryan's shoulder. He felt her calm resolve flow through him. Through the translator, she shared a vision of the dunes blooming with life and of human and guardian working side by side. The officers listened in silence, understanding that this bond was stronger than any weapon. They rose as one and promised to return with the full support of command. That night, Ryan and Valara walked to the river's edge. The moon reflected in the water like a silver promise. Ryan took Valara's hand and said, "Our journey begins now." She smiled and pressed her palm to his heart. Together they watched the moonlight dance on the water. They knew that the frontier had forever changed. A new era of cooperation and hope would spread through the galaxy, carried by a soldier and a guardian who had become stronger together.